If I could say one thing to this man who did this, I would ask him to let the police know where Pete is.
This is too incomprehensible. I can't believe that this person would hate me that much. To want to murder his own children, who he worshipped, the ground they walked on.
Please, please help us to find our dear Alison. Our lives will never be the same. We must find her.
There was this incredible story, hijacked in the middle of Australia, and her boyfriend was missing.
It's hard to imagine anywhere that's more isolated than the outback.
The person involved in this incident is armed and dangerous.
I couldn't imagine a more frightening and intimidating experience.
That magic combination of the British tourist, the human interest, the murder, the mystery.
There was evidence there was a lot of blood there.
If I could say one thing to this man, I would ask him to let the police know where Pete is.
She's the only one that can actually tell anyone exactly what happened that night.
You can't make up DNA profiles. It's either there or it's not there.
This is the first time I've been exposed to that type of voracious, shark-feeding frenzy of the media.
Everyone had a theory.
The question I have is, where is Peter Falconio?
We really still don't know what happened. We really still don't know.
In 2001, English backpackers Joanne Lees and boyfriend Peter Falconio arrived in Australia, halfway through a world trip. They purchased a combi van in Sydney and embarked on an adventure through southeast and central Australia. The couple arrived in Alice Springs, the central heart of Australia, on Thursday, the 12th of July.
Alice Springs was quite a different place then. We didn't really have a crime problem. It was very much a community policing type of style where it was high engagement with people and a great place to live and work. I really enjoyed it.
It's never boring. You know, to me, the world comes to Alice. You don't have to go to the world, you know.
Peter Falconio called his parents in the UK on Friday the 13th of July. The young couple were in good spirits and excited about their travels. The next day, Peter and Joanne headed north on the Stewart Highway towards Darwin.
Joanne and Peter, as we understand it, left Alice Springs around 4 o'clock in the afternoon to head north. They stopped at a place called Tea Tree on the way to get some petrol.
After watching the sunset at Tea Tree Roadhouse, 194 kilometres north of Alice Springs, the couple drove another 100 kilometres towards Darwin, passing Barrow Creek Roadhouse.
They continued on a little bit longer, and Joanne noticed a few fires by the side of the road, not knowing what these were. Peter wanted to stop and put them out. He thought they were a bit dangerous to keep going. But Joanne, feeling a little bit uncomfortable, she said, "No, Pete, let's keep driving. Let's keep driving."
They had been smoking a joint prior to that at Tea Tree, so they might have been a little bit clouded. They may have been, quite sort of dreamy and relaxed and a bit tired, maybe.
My first surprise was that they were still driving and had bypassed, well, 1 Tea Tree, 2 Barrow Creek because it had turned dark, and the signs everywhere in those days were just all about staying off the road at night.
You couldn't pick a more remote area of Australia, and that time of year very cold too.
It's very isolated, very little hope of any type of rescue if you get stuck, unless there is passing traffic, and there's very little of that.
Unless you've got a big moon, it's literally just pitch black. You see nothing, only from what your headlights can throw.
Peter noticed some headlights behind them in the combi and expressed some frustration that the person behind them wasn't trying to overtake, irrespective of how much they slowed the combi down. Eventually, that four-wheel drive pulled out from behind them, travelled along next to them, and the driver indicated that there was a problem with the back of their camper van.
To have someone drive up beside you in the middle of the Australian outback in his ute and gesticulate to you would have been a bit alarming to most people.
Just after 8 p.m, 11 kilometres past Barrow Creek Roadhouse, the couple pulled their combi van over to the side of the Stewart Highway.
The man pulled up behind them as well. Peter got out and Joanne heard a conversation to the effect that there was some sparks coming out of the exhaust pipe. Peter moved back to the front of the combi van, said to Joanne, "Get into the driver's seat and rev the engine for me."
Then Peter comes back and picks up his cigarettes and then appears to be quite relaxed, doesn't appear to be threatened in any way, then returns to the rear of the camper van and the discussion continues.
Joanne revved the engine and heard what she thought was the combi van backfiring, as it had done in the past.
In the middle of the outback, in absolute darkness and unfamiliar with the surroundings, the young couple had hoped this stranger would help them during their Australian adventure.
Next thing she knows, a gun pointed at her, and there's a man looking at her through the window.
He then tells Joanne to move over to the passenger seat, and then he proceeds to tie her up.
Stunned and terrified, Joanne's hands were tied behind her back with manacles made from cable ties and tape.
She was in a pretty frightened and terrorised state. She was clearly traumatised by what was going on.
Pushed her out of the van. She didn't know where Pete was. He didn't have the opportunity to restrain her ankles. She was kicking around too much.
He pulled her up, made her stand up, and then guided her past the camper van towards his own vehicle. She never saw Peter's body. She never saw a body at all.
And then somehow he manhandled her into the back of the four-wheel drive.
Screaming and struggling, Joanne Lees lay in the attacker's vehicle, calling desperately for her boyfriend, Peter Falconio.
While she was in the back of the four-wheel drive, she heard some dragging noises, didn't know what they were. She knew that she was probably going to get killed. She was more worried about what would happen before that happened.
Fearful for her life, Joanne Lees made an impulsive and shrewd decision that altered the course of her fate.
She was in fear of her life, and that's what got her out of the back of the truck and running into the bush. She had nothing else to lose.
When you're running into the bush there, you barely see, the bushes in front of you until they're kind of upon you.
The headlights at the time were the only thing that illuminated the scene when Joanne was running for her life through the bushes. It was like a blanket had been put over the world.
I couldn't imagine a more frightening and intimidating experience, knowing that there's really no one to come to your assistance.
Just after 8:30 p.m, in remote and vast bushland, Joanne Lees crouched beneath a bush hidden in the darkness. Having escaped from the man who had attacked her, she remained motionless as he searched for her with his dog.
He was unable to find her once she, shot off into the bush and then took a turn and ran 30 metres in another direction. So that saved her life. I've no doubt about that.
He looked for her with a torch. The dog never seemed to find her as well. In fact, the dog just ignored her most of the time, as far as she can recall. She slid under a low piece of scrub and just waited there until he left.
People in Britain and other well-populated countries can't imagine how vast the outback is and how lonely you would be if you were suddenly left to your own devices there, particularly if you thought you were being threatened by an attacker.
It would be probably the most intimidating and scary situations to be in.
Hidden from her attacker and unsure of his whereabouts, Joanne struggled to remove the manacles she was tied with.
She heard some movement of vehicles, assumed that he'd taken the combi away. Then she heard footsteps again and the torchlight once more, and then he drove off in his four-wheel drive.
She was hiding in that shrub for 5 or 6 hours in cold winter temperatures. It would have been a very lonely and traumatic experience for her.
And it wasn't until many hours later that she actually ran out onto the road, risking her life in front of a huge road train trailer that drives along the highway. And that's when Vince Miller stopped and picked her up.
60 metres long, lights all over it, 40 or 50 wheels on the thing making a massive noise, but she had no choice but to try and stop this thing in the middle of the night. That's how desperate she was. And then to trust that person to take her to safety.
Unable to stop suddenly, driver Vince Miller feared he had run over the young woman. Stopping the large truck almost a kilometre down the highway, Vince discovered a distressed and injured Lise, who told him and his co-driver of her ordeal. They embarked on a search for Peter, but stopped soon after Vince learned that the attacker was armed and still at large. They immediately drove Joanne 11 kilometres south to Barrow Creek Roadhouse.
An iconic old outback pub, rough as guts, you know, seemingly full of rough characters and whatever, but really with hearts of gold, you know, salt of the earth people.
Barrow Creek proprietor Les Pilton and his partner Helen Jones looked after Joanne and called the police immediately.
Les would have stopped everything. He would have just worked his guts out to try and sort that situation out.
I got a phone call, being kind of one of the more senior police there, to say that they'd received a report of a young woman being abducted and her boyfriend being murdered. So I immediately went to work, I think 3 or 4 in the morning.
A huge manhunt is underway in the Northern Territory, where a gunman is believed to have kidnapped a British tourist and terrorised his girlfriend.
We consider the person involved in this incident is armed and dangerous.
Within 24 hours, over 100 police, volunteers and aircraft had been deployed in the search for the gunman.
Police set up some roadblocks and there was a huge manhunt going on, and amazing detours around the area were being put in place.
The roadblocks really didn't get enacted until the Sunday morning. So you're talking 12, 16 hours from when it actually happened.
North to Darwin, south to Alice Springs, and even south to South Australia as well. And so if you were going to escape, you'd have had a hard time avoiding the police.
Well, he's long gone, unless he's local.
They should have got Aboriginal trackers involved right from day one. The ability of those people is just astonishing. They'll track somebody through vast areas of grass, yet here are some of the best trackers in the entire world, and they weren't really utilised until later, or too late, I think. Yeah.
The police released a composite image of the gunman and his truck, as described by Joanne Lise, in the hope the public would assist in the identification of her attacker.
You just described half of the Territory male population. But as far as that type of Land Cruiser in Alice Springs went, oh, well, they were a dime a dozen.
As police searched for the gunman in the hope of finding Peter alive, blood was discovered at the scene, and forensic biologist Carmen Eckhoff was called in to the investigation.
Very quickly obvious to me that there was an area that had considerable blood. There was more blood than what you could see visibly. And then as you could push away some of the top dirt to then expose some of the blood underneath. So yeah, and you could see actually where it's been flicked up to try and cover up the scene.
They'd found the camper van a little further up the highway, parked off the side of the road in deep bush, some distance from where Joanne had been hiding.
I was asked to examine the combi van. Obviously, we were looking for blood. We also took out some other items, took a sample of the steering wheel and the gear shift. And the reason being is whoever drove the car must have had to have held it to get it over the rough terrain. Basically, we use a technique of tape lifting, where we take just ordinary sticky tape and essentially go around the steering wheel collecting cellular material. The sample was then put into a sterilised container, and it came back with me when I went back to the lab in Darwin for analysis.
4 days after the attack, Peter Falconio's father and brother arrived from the UK. Taken to the site at Barrow Creek, they made a public appeal for any information. As media interest intensified, Joanne Lise remained elusive, and everyone was keen to see and hear from the woman at the centre of the incident.
Media, from not just Australian media, but from all over the world, sort of gravitated towards Alice Springs. So every time you drive your car in and out, you were kind of fighting between vans of cameras, and it consumed the town. It was huge.
Joanne was reluctant to talk about what had happened. She was reluctant to go into any detail about the actual incident. And reporters generally want as much information as possible for their story. Despite the police efforts to try to persuade her to open up and to talk to the media, she kept her lips tightly sealed.
That was probably the main difficulty in terms of trying to formulate a story.
A lot of people just don't know how to handle sudden media attention.
Amid the unprecedented media frenzy and search for word from Joanne Leese, local journalist Mark Wilton received a phone call from Helen Jones, a friend from Barrow Creek Roadhouse who was looking after Joanne.
It was very early on Monday morning that Joanne was with her. She explained to me that Joanne had read the papers, had seen what was in the papers. She wasn't happy with some of the inaccuracies in the story that she'd read so far. The other papers turned up later in the day and they got worse. Joanne was actually quite upset about them.
The information wasn't coming out from the police as much as we would like to have received it, and certainly we were getting no news out of Joanne. In terms of that, yes, of course, news agencies start to create conjecture as to perhaps what the stories were.
As hundreds of media descended on the small town in pursuit of a story or glimpse of Joanne, Mark Wilton was invited to an interview to clarify issues Joanne had with media reports.
She wouldn't answer anything to do with the actual incident, as it were, because she'd been asked not to. Police didn't even know she was doing the interview, mind you, but she said, I don't really feel as though I should. And a lot of that she did say was out of respect for Pete's family. She said she'd never at any stage said she heard a gunshot, what she thought was a gunshot. She thought it was the combi backfiring. She just wanted to set the record straight in a few things. I found exactly what I thought. Somebody who'd been through something quite traumatic.
11 days after the attack, Joanne Leese finally agreed to face the media. Accompanied by Peter's brother, Paul Falconio, Joanne made a brief, prepared statement.
If I could say one thing to this man who did this, I would ask him to let the police know where Pete is.
It wasn't going to be any ordinary media conference. She wanted to stage it on her terms. Her terms were, I want a list of questions beforehand.
She wasn't going to talk to the media en masse. It was not going to be a press conference as we kind of thought it would be.
She was given the list of questions by the police and she crossed 10 of them off. I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about that.
Anyone that's spoken to me or has been in contact with me, no one doubts me.
And the comments that she made in that press conference kind of stung a little bit because we'd only been in this story for 11 days so far, but she'd already created this rift between, I guess, what the international media and the local media were looking for and what her perspective on it was.
It didn't really change anything. It sort of opened up more questions than anything else.
Joanne's conduct had become cause for concern and frustration, and public speculation about her inaccuracies in evidence would cause further tension and doubt.
There have been suspicions about her story. In an attempt to put the rumours to rest, Territory Police for the first time produced photos of the injuries she received that night.
Although there was evidence at the scene, there wasn't a whole lot of it. So there was still too many questions to answer. And of course the police have to discount the people who are so close to the victim to start off with to make sure to rule them out. But I don't think they necessarily ruled her out entirely as far as the media were concerned.
People expect victims to act in a particular way, and when they don't do that, they then create a bit of mistrust around them. So I think that's what happened with Joanne. She knew that there was people who were investigating the matter that just didn't believe her.
I knew that the English press were tough, but it wasn't until I received that note back from just one news editor out of the many that I was dealing with that said, we reckon she did it. And then I thought, hang on a sec, there's another story going on here.
Northern Territory Police were overwhelmed with the influx of media, whose pursuit for information was unrelenting. When news of CCTV footage surfaced,
There'd been a rumour, a suggestion, that the gunman or the attacker had been caught on CCTV footage at an Alice Springs service station. But no CCTV footage had emerged.
I think it was 19 days, I think, roughly after the incident, when we knew about the video.
Where had that footage gone to? Why had the police not used it to find the attacker and publish those pictures on the TV and the internet and the newspaper?
The story was that they sent it away to get enhanced. You know, you've got to realise that this footage at the time had what they believed was, you know, the truck that he was driving, and they didn't even put that out.
You know, it was critical that we tried to get the registration number of the vehicle, and we tried everything, the most sophisticated technology to be able to do that.
You could have identified the car off the CCTV.
I don't think anyone would doubt that it could have been handled a whole lot better.
I think also in defence of the team, we were consumed with thousands of lines of inquiry. Where we went wrong is how we prioritised what was important and what wasn't.
5 months into the investigation, amid a task force shake-up and mounting frustration with media pressure and police procedure, a new lead detective was appointed.
I got a phone call from Paul White, who was just taken over as the new commissioner, and said, "Congratulations, you're now taking over the Falconio investigation." I put the phone down and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, in all honesty, because it didn't seem to be particularly well organised.
In 2001, Colleen Gwynn was the regional superintendent for the Central Region in Alice Springs.
I observed for probably about a week, and it was clear to me that we had a task force that wasn't gelling very well. There was people there that I don't think were there for the right reasons, and there was a number of people that didn't actually believe the victim. So when you're investigating a major crime such as this, you have to believe the victim. Otherwise you will get careless and you'll miss things. So the first thing I did was get some detectives on aeroplanes and go and follow up what I saw was the priority inquiries. And I think that's probably one of the best decisions I ever made.
Months after her traumatic experience, Joanne Leese returned to the UK, disillusioned with the police and wary of the media.
Oh, she was angry. She was frustrated. She didn't trust us. She didn't believe that we had the ability to be able to investigate this matter. Yeah, look, we got a lot of things wrong. We spent some time with her. We were able to clarify some of the areas that were perhaps a little bit confusing. It then also reinforced my view that we had someone who was a remarkable witness. It was just incredible, that her recollection and her ability to articulate things that happened in the most traumatic event that anyone could ever go through.
Task force members whittled down the number of suspects from 3,000 to 26 men. They had assembled a DNA profile and possible identity of a suspect they were particularly interested in locating.
We had a DNA profile from an unknown male, and that residual was very similar to the DNA profile that we found on the back of the T-shirt that belonged to Joanne.
With the discovery of a DNA profile, the task force were hopeful to compare results with national and international databases. Disappointingly, there was no match.
That was a beautiful profile. We got a full DNA picture from it. That unknown profile that we found on the T-shirt is also present on the gear stick and on the steering wheel, which just gives a bit more weight to the police saying, well, if they find this person, then they know they can ask the questions and interrogate them to say, well, you know, we also know that you were in the vehicle. How come your DNA's in the vehicle?
Carmen Eckhoff was our forensic expert here and did an outstanding job. I think Carmen was such a critical part of our case. The forensic area was critical. So they were there side by side with us for a lot of time during the preparation of our case.
Forensics meticulously tested the manacles with which the attacker had tied Joanne's wrists.
The manacles were a homemade attempt of making handcuffs, made with cable ties and black tape. Even though she was handcuffed at the back, she managed to skimmy out of them, and everybody was very disbelieving of it. But she was able to do it because they'd put that extra link in the manacle. There was a lot of strawberry lip gloss on the manacles, which Joanne had with her and was using to try and grease up to try and get out of it. It sort of masks any fingerprints that you may have found on the manacles when he tightened them. We had to find ways of getting tape to lift without damaging any DNA that could be underneath. Mostly it was Joanne's DNA on the outer surfaces, but further underneath the tape we did find traces of DNA from an unknown person.
With the discovery of DNA in the manacles, the forensics team sought out the expertise of Dr. Jonathan Whittaker, an English DNA scientist who specialised in low copy number, a sensitive DNA profiling technique that amplifies the levels of DNA from small amounts of starting material.
I actually sent him the results I'd received when we attempted it in our lab, and asked him if he would think that that was good enough quality to report on. And it was decided that I should take the centre loop manacle that we hadn't actually examined at all, and I was to take that over to Jonathan and his team for him to do the low copy number. The results were essentially the same. Their results were a little more clearer, if you like, but because their technique had been peer-reviewed, it meant that the results could be accepted by the courts.
The DNA evidence was pivotal, and police were keen to find one suspect from early in the investigation and verify his DNA. Finding him, however, would prove a difficult and onerous task.
Bradley Murdoch was one of the early suspects in the hunt for the Outback gunman. He was interviewed by police in Broome, who accepted his alibi.
It was clear that his behaviour and what he'd done following the events of the 14th of July were odd, and he'd changed his appearance, he'd changed the appearance of his vehicle. He was acting like a man who was running away from something. We should have made him more of a priority, and if we did, we would have had him much sooner.
Murdoch was known to the police for different reasons. As it turned out, he was painted as somebody who was definitely involved in the drug game.
43-year-old Bradley Murdoch lived in Broome in northwestern Australia. He was known to police as a local drug runner and served time for reckless use of a firearm. Questioned in 2001, local police accepted his alibi, after he stressed he couldn't have driven the 1,943 kilometres back to Broome within 24 hours after the alleged incident.
That came up time and time again, and you couldn't have done it. You couldn't have committed the crime, gotten back to Alice Springs and then head down the Tanami and made it to Broome. We did a reenactment with a similar car, similar weighted down, the same, pretty much followed it to a T, and we made it within plenty of time. And that was a critical part. There was more than enough time for Bradley Murdoch to do what he did and arrive in Broome.
As forensic and task force investigators closed in on Bradley Murdoch, he went to ground.
Well, Murdoch was spending a lot of his time in South Australia in the Riverland, living on the guest house of a Swan Reach property that was owned by a man, a woman and a young child. He was turning that guest house into a bit of a bunker, turning into a bolt hole that he could hide in.
He was ready to go. He was on the run. He knew we were after him, and he knew it was only a matter of days before we turned up and arrested him. So he had packed his vehicle up and he was going to hide. He was heading off to Western Australia, somewhere where he couldn't be found, so he was on the move.
We got word that Murdoch had been arrested and was going to stand trial in Adelaide for rape, specifically the unlawful sexual intercourse with a 12-year-old girl and the rape of her mother.
But it's his DNA that could also hold the key on the night Peter Falconio disappeared.
I knew that they had a bloke for a long time they were very keen on being able to get hold of, but I do know that DNA was an issue for them. And their break came in South Australia, basically.
So he was charged in South Australia, and I met him while he was on remand in Yatala prison. He wouldn't give us an interview at the time, but he did have a long conversation with us about his involvement or non-involvement in our matter here in the Northern Territory. Quite an intimidating man. We didn't actually address the evidence. He spoke and he raised different components of our evidence. Obviously the truck stop video, because it had been all over the news hundreds of times. So he wanted to let us know that, yeah, that was him, but it wasn't on the night that we're referring to.
We were left with a truly bizarre situation. We were allowed to name Bradley Murdoch within South Australia with regard to the rape case. We were not allowed to link him to being a suspect to the Falconio case, because as the defence had said from the very start, their case was that this matter had been created, fabricated, that their client was being framed purely to get his DNA onto the public record so that it could be used in the Falconio case.
There was no doubt in my mind that he was panicking underneath his kind of tough exterior where he was trying to intimidate me. Inside, I imagine that there was absolute panic.
After little physical evidence was found to support the rape and abduction charges, Bradley Murdoch was acquitted after the jury's verdict was not unanimous.
The judge turned to Murdoch in the dock of the court, said, "Mr. Murdoch, you're free to go." As the sheriff's officer opened the door to the dock, the Northern Territory Police that had been perched for 2 weeks flooded into the dock, trying to push the sheriff's officer away to grab Murdoch.
We had to be in a position to execute an arrest warrant and get him up to the Territory, which we did the day that he was acquitted in South Australia. We were there and took him into custody.
Grabbed him by the top of the head and shoved him, basically folded him, because he's such a tall man, into the back of this car while the media's filming it. The Territory coppers watch the car go off and say, "See you in Darwin."
After dramatic scenes inside the Adelaide courthouse, Bradley Murdoch was arrested and transported to Darwin to face charges over the murder of Peter Falconio.
But he was a large man. He was known colloquially as Big Brad amongst his contemporaries and colleagues. So he was very imposing.
Circumstantially, it read very, very badly for Murdoch.
We had a great legal team. We had a great case, and we knew that, and we'd done our homework, and we knew we were presenting a matter that would be committed to trial, absolutely.
Yesterday, Territory Police matched Murdoch's DNA with blood found on the T-shirt of Peter Falconio's girlfriend, Joanne Lees.
In May 2004, 2 years and 9 months after the attack, Joanne Lees arrived back in Australia to face Bradley Murdoch at the committal hearing.
If there was any anxiety, it was probably around Joanne's welfare. She was back in the Northern Territory. It's a place that doesn't have a lot of great memories for her.
Joanne was arriving in a police squad car, unmarked, driving at breakneck speed.
So that didn't do her any favours whatsoever. Had she just come to the court, walked along the pavement in a normal manner, then everything would have been fine. She might have got a lot of attention, but certainly it wouldn't have attracted the negative publicity that she got as a result of the car.
There was issues with the transportation of Joanne to and from the court and her safety and the attention and the perception that still she wasn't a credible witness.
The committal was pretty brutal for her. I mean, the journos were pretty cruel with her.
During the committal hearing, startling evidence emerged about an affair Joanne had in Sydney in 2001. Her reliability as a witness, police procedure and contaminated DNA evidence were all called into question. Despite the salacious revelations, after 5 weeks of hearings, Bradley Murdoch was ordered to stand trial.
We had to then get our case together. The work really started, and it was like our second phase. We got our man, now let's get him convicted.
On the 17th of October 2005, the criminal trial began. Peter Falconio's family returned to Australia, and Joanne Lees possessed a confidence not publicly seen before.
When the court case came around, she was very much more professional in her presentation. She even strode up the front steps of the courthouse, acknowledged the media.
Bradley John Murdoch maintained his innocence and entered a plea of not guilty. His legal team were confident leading into the trial.
When Bradley Murdoch appeared in court, he looked like a man who was pretty confident about being found not guilty.
I do know that he intimidated a lot of the witnesses just with his mere presence.
There was something like 80 witnesses called, more than 200 pieces of evidence.
A surprise witness for the prosecution was James Heppy, a former associate, friend and housemate of Murdoch's. His evidence would prove controversial and elicit a vicious exchange between both men in court.
He was a man that had a disgruntled relationship with Bradley John Murdoch, no doubt about that, and the jury were directed to take his evidence.
He was trying to negotiate his way out of a long prison sentence. He said to the police, if you look after me, then I will help you convict Bradley Murdoch.
My problem with Heppy is that it's tainted evidence no matter what you do with Heppy. It's, you know, he's a former partner of Murdoch's.
After volatile scenes inside the courtroom, the case continued, and British DNA scientist Dr. Jonathan Whittaker took to the stand.
The DNA evidence was certainly very well prepared, presented in court, and even the three judges made the comment that the DNA evidence is watertight and that Murdoch's team would not be able to have that DNA thrown out.
There was a lot of doubt about the whole DNA business. There was a lot of doubt about the so-called low copy number DNA and whether or not it could be expanded and could be used as a match against Murdoch's DNA.
Whether you believe or don't believe in low copy number, ultimately it's the whole case that goes before the court and is judged against. I'm a firm believer that you can't make up DNA profiles. It's either there or it's not there.
Murdoch's defence lawyer, Grant Algie, questioned the contamination of DNA in the manacles, claiming poor police procedure and tampering of evidence.
I think our biggest issue with DNA is contamination. I was asked to retest the homemade manacles, and I think it came out in court that my director at the time, Dr. Peter Thatcher, had his DNA turn up. The testing is so sensitive, it's really difficult to say exactly how it got there. I can't answer that, but I'm expected in court to then give an answer. So I was against retesting, but I was forced to do it.
The DNA evidence and the eyewitness evidence of Joanne are the only two things that, that could put him. Everything else was totally circumstantial.
What I think we've all lost sight of is the fact that even though we have DNA evidence, it's still up to the police to piece together the whole case to present that for the courts, and then it's for the courts to decide.
In the last days of the trial, the defendant Bradley John Murdoch took to the stand.
He had to take the stand because some of the evidence against him had become so damning. And Rex Wild, who is one of the most incredible prosecutors, stood up and said to Bradley John Murdoch, "Where did you bury Peter Falconio?" That was his first question. And it took Bradley John Murdoch by surprise, to the point that he actually appeared somewhat insulted. Look, we knew that Bradley John Murdoch was a bad man, and I guess those layers began to peel off as the questioning continued. But there was really nothing that Bradley John Murdoch offered to the court in his testimony that discounted the fact that he was the man that committed this crime.
After a 9-week trial that heard allegations of controversial and contaminated evidence, a witness who was unfaltering in her story, and a defendant that staunchly denied guilt, the jury returned with a verdict.
A Darwin jury found Bradley John Murdoch is the Outback killer, declaring him guilty of the British tourist's murder.
There was a unanimous guilty verdict from the jury, guilty after guilty after guilty.
I think probably the jury made the right decision in the circumstances. Whether it reflected the accuracy and the truth of the crime remains to be seen.
I wouldn't have convicted him on the evidence that was presented in the court.
I was just happy that we could play our part and get a conviction and put Bradley Murdoch behind bars for 28 years.
After the verdict, Joanne Leese and the Falconio family addressed the media outside the courthouse.
I'm obviously delighted with the unanimous verdict given here today.
Most important thing to my family now is to find Peter's body.
Bradley John Murdoch was jailed for a non-parole period of 28 years, while Joanne Leese was pursued by continuous speculation as to the credibility of her story. A story that has reportedly earned her over $500,000. Murdoch unsuccessfully appealed his conviction and is currently serving a life sentence in Darwin's Berrima jail. He maintains his innocence as public speculation continues about the incident and the whereabouts of Peter Falconio.
I've always felt that there is another chapter to be written in this story. What really happened to Peter Falconio? What was the motive? Who killed him? Was it really Bradley Murdoch?
This is the case in Australia that never ends, and I don't think there will be any conclusion until perhaps the remains of Peter Falconio are found or someone with more information about the case comes forward.
It's just a pity that someone lost their life here, and I guess with Joanne, you know, she lives with this every day. And the Falconios are still without their son, who they don't know where he is. So you have to remember about the people that are part of this, and that's not us, but it's them.
You know, until that body is found, we will not know one way or the other categorically what happened to Peter Falconio.
I don't wish death on him because I want him to suffer.
The facts at the time were a vehicle had left the roadway, travelled across the embankment, through a fence and into the dam.
We set up lighting and we didn't find any marks, and that concerned me greatly.
Detectives and the public were faced with a stark choice. Was it an accident or something worse?
And I don't think after you listen to Farquharson you can come to too many other conclusions other than he killed his kids.
On the evening of Father's Day, September 2005, a car was driving along this highway. Inside were a father and his 3 sons. Suddenly, it veered off the road and into a dam. The aftermath of that tragic event would stun the nation and leave the family devastated.
When you lose a child, let alone 3, you die yourself. I found that I died with my children, and I haven't had a life since.
It's really affected my life greatly, hugely. And it's destroyed her, totally.
It's the cruelest thing to have to live with, knowing that you were this person 10 years ago. You're a totally different person.
About an hour's drive west of the city of Melbourne lies the rural township of Winchelsea. With a population of around 1,500, the peaceful community would, in 2005, be thrust unwillingly into the media spotlight.
I think Winchelsea's an interesting place. It's your typical semi-rural, rural community. It's a place where people tend to be born there and stay there, and they go to school there, they marry people that they know from the local area, and they tend to live in the area where they were born and not move far away.
Cindy Gambino had known Robert Farquharson since they were teenagers. After her previous boyfriend was tragically killed, what started as a friendship developed into a romance, with Cindy initially attracted to the well-liked Robbie Farquharson. It was an attraction that wouldn't last.
Cindy and Robert met when she was a youngster. Robert was a local lad that she knew from around the traps. Everybody knew little Robbie Farquharson, and he was one of those guys in the group. He was not seen as a particular love interest on Cindy's part.
There was no real physical attraction there, and that's how I knew I'd settled for second best. But there was security there.
He was just solid, reliable Robbie that was always around, offering her lifts giving her a lift home from the pub, giving her a lift from the local disco. He was Mr. Solid, Mr. Reliable that was never going to want to move away from Winchelsea, which suited her fine.
There's the belly here. I fell pregnant 6 months into the relationship, and that's when things started going downhill.
The belly.
The baby.
And Rob was like a big mummy's boy. He'd stayed at home a lot longer than his friends. When he found Cindy, she already had somewhere to live. She was already independent. And he sort of sees that strength in her, you know, that she can look after him. And he sort of treated her like his mum.
There was a lot of things that he wouldn't do. I remember the first time I went shopping on my own and left Jay with him, and Jay was just a new baby. And come home and Jay was in a dirty nappy and he wouldn't change the nappy. Never ever got up during the night to the children. It was always me.
She and Rob had been together, I think, for about 6 years then, when they decided to tie the knot. Even on her wedding day, when people were fussing around her, saying, you know, smile, this is fantastic, this is such a big day for you, she was having second thoughts.
By then, they had 2 children, Jay and Tyler, and were joined 2 years later by their 3rd child, Bailey. Even in the early stages of the marriage, flaws in Robert's character were beginning to emerge.
I think he was dissatisfied with his life. I think he was resentful that he had to go to work, he had to get a second job. But I think he was quietly angry with Cindy too, because she was a very strong woman, and it was that strength that he resented.
The financial pressure that Farquharson found himself under inevitably took its toll on family life.
He was actually very angry, and he would rile the kids, he would rouse the kids up. It was passive-aggressive behaviour where he would wind them up to the point that Jay, the older one, would sit and cry. He would do that until they burst into tears, and then the little boy would go in his room and slam the door.
He would stir them up till they got to a point where they were so angry with him that they had no respect for him whatsoever.
That's actually sadistic and it's quite cruel. He sort of was wearing his own anger out, projecting his own anger onto everyone around him.
With Robert increasingly disenchanted with his job and family life, his marriage to Cindy began to disintegrate. In May 2004, Cindy met single father Stephen Mools, a local contractor who was working on their property. Stephen himself had only recently come out of a traumatic breakup, and he now found himself in the middle of another one.
Cindy and Robert's relationship was sinking. When Stephen came on the scene, I think he became a bit of a confidant, where she would say, you know, I'm not really that happy, what do you think? And he didn't really want to get involved in that.
And she made it very clear that, you know, she thought something of me. I said, well, I'm sorry, but you're married, and I've just come out of a very ugly relationship. It's just not happening. Eventually, I became aware that they were separating. Rob would come around to my house nearly every night, and I was trying to counsel him.
I guess as a single dad of 2 boys himself, doing it hard for Stephen, it was very frustrating and irritating to watch Robert grizzling and moaning and doing nothing to move forward.
After, it was a good couple of months, I got to the point where I went, you know what? You're an idiot. You don't want your wife back.
Stephen actually had quite a scene with him where Stephen was saying, you know, pull your socks up. You're not a father. You're not even being a father. You know, you're being a big baby. Grow up and act like a father. I'm not trying to take your place. I don't want to be you. I've got my own children. But if you want to be a father, start behaving like one. So it was quite a sort of toxic triangle that he really didn't want to be involved in.
Cindy asked Robert to leave their home in November 2004, sure that their marriage was over.
He always said to me when we had a 3rd child, oh, this is going to wreck our marriage, and I couldn't work out why a 3rd child would wreck our marriage. And it wasn't the 3rd child that wrecked our marriage, it was him. All I wanted to do was be married and have children, but I just married the wrong person.
While she began a new chapter in her life, Robert struggled to cope with the breakdown of the relationship.
He was saying that they'd separated, but it was a mutual thing, that they had separated on good terms and that he was moving on in his life. That wasn't actually true at all. That was completely untrue. He was very angry. He was stalking Cindy.
He was always looking for where my car was and who I was with. It was not a nice feeling.
Well, we'd see his car go past overnight, and then he'd obviously go around the block, and then all of a sudden we'd see it again and be like, what is this guy doing? It was behaviour that was consistent with someone who had obsessive, maybe even possessive thoughts. And I remember I used to say to Cindy, you know, is he all together?
There was a moment a few days before, it was a Wednesday night, and he rang me and he wasn't doing very well. He was really depressed. And I spoke to Stephen's mother about it, and she said, just watch out. That pricked my ears up. But I thought he was suicidal, not homicidal.
However increasingly bizarre and disturbing Robert's behaviour was becoming, it always seemed to be directed towards Cindy. And so, when Father's Day 2005 came round, there was never any suggestion that his children would be in any sort of danger.
After I said goodbye to the kids and drove off, I didn't think that was going to be the last time I'd ever see my kids. Jay absolutely loved football. He had a dry sense of humour. He was a good kid, very responsible.
Jay was an extremely intelligent little boy, very focused on where he wanted to head in life, wanted to be a fireman.
Tyler was Mum's boy. He would come up and just turn the vacuum cleaner off and, I just want to give you a hug, Mum.
I could see, by the way he was towards me, that there was something missing from Dad.
Let's take a picture.
There was definitely something missing from Dad, whether it was cuddles, whether it was bedtime stories, combination of all of the above, I don't know, but there was something missing.
What about the muscle man?
Bailey, on the other hand,
Bailey, no.
he was just a really magnetic little boy.
Yay!
He took to me like a duck does to water.
He loved Stephen to bits. He just didn't have a chance.
Father's Day in 2005 began like any normal day.
The whole day started so well. Cindy spent the morning with her own father, took her children to see her own dad, and then she took the children to Rob.
I'd had a photo of the three boys blown up for him for when he got home.
She was making their beds, getting their school lunches ready, getting their bags and their uniforms ready for the next day, and the clock's ticking, and where are they?
Next thing I hear a car pull up which sounded exactly like his car. I thought, oh, here they are now. And it was him. He lobbed on my doorstep and said, I've killed the kids.
So what do you mean, where are the kids? Why are you here? Why did you leave them? Where are they? Stephen was at his house, and she telephoned him straight away and said, there's been an accident, the kids are in the water. None of it was making any sense.
I got a phone call, and my cousin, Aaron, actually answered it. And he held the phone away from his ear and went, I think it's Cindy, Steve, and she's screaming. Handed me the phone. I held the phone and she's screaming, the kids are in the water, the kids are in the water. I'm going, what kids?
Cindy jumped in her car with Robert and headed out into the night, still unaware of exactly what had happened to her three children. The only thing she could determine was that Robert's car had crashed into a dam on the outskirts of town. While Robert had escaped the vehicle, her three sons were trapped inside. Unbeknownst to her, the car had by that point already been underwater for almost 30 minutes.
All I do remember is turning onto the highway, and by the time I'd hit the roadhouse, I was doing 145 clicks. Oh, I just remember saying I had to get to my kids.
It was 7:45 when they arrived at the dam, followed minutes later by Stephen. Still, no one was aware of the terrible fate that had befallen the 3 children.
Cindy's car's parked there. Rob's car's nowhere in sight. Cindy was hysterical, just running up and down, up and down, up and down. What's going on? You know, where are the kids? They're in the water. Instantly, from the second of seeing him, you got to smoke. I said, what? My initial thought is, hang on. You're telling me your kids are in the water? You're asking me for a smoke. There's something not right about you.
Where are the kids?
I said, get out of my face or I'll fucking kill you. I jumped in the water and I'm trying all these different spots and, yeah, obviously to no avail. We wouldn't be sitting here today. It was only shortly after that that the services arrived. They started unloading ropes and this and that, and as soon as I saw a rope, I went, yep. And I grabbed a rope and started tying it around my waist, and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going back in. At least I got a rope this time. No, you're not, mate.
Well, I was the first ambulance to arrive on the scene. I was actually pointed out to Robert Farquharson. I found out that he'd been the driver of the vehicle, and at that time there was 3 kids trapped in the car in the dam.
I remember glancing up. I glanced up a few times actually to see where he was, and you know, I remember he was up at Cindy's car, had his legs slightly spread and his arms folded, just looking. And not even comforting Cindy. I remember saying that to myself as well. Not even comforting Cindy. Cindy was hysterical, absolutely beside herself.
His demeanour was a bit odd, I found. Like the time I had with him, he never asked about the kids. He said he'd been driving along Princess Highway. He had this coughing fit, which caused him to black out and career across the road and go into the dam.
During the questioning, he turned around and said, no, I had a coughing fit. Now, at that stage, it got every alarm bell that I had going. People can have coughing fits and black out, but basically it's associated with quite often a heavy smoker who's got a disease process very similar to asthma. Now, it's something that when started doesn't disappear in 5 seconds or 5 minutes. It is something that when you look for and listen for, you'd have signs and symptoms to support what he stated. There was nothing I could find to support what he said.
Meanwhile, officers from the Victoria Police Major Collision Investigation Unit had arrived at the dam, and their years of experience investigating incidents on the roads was telling them something was amiss at the scene.
Where motor cars run off the road, then the driver panics and he oversteers the car, they lose control and see those marks regularly on our roads. So initially I thought that that's probably what would have happened, so we're going to set up a lighting system back. In the end, we went back nearly 1 kilometre along the road. We set up lighting and we didn't find any marks, and that concerned me greatly.
As police conducted their investigation at the scene, Farquharson was taken to a local hospital for a medical examination. Shortly afterwards, he was joined there by detectives determined to find out what had happened from the sole witness to the incident.
I expected to see someone pretty bedraggled and scared and upset, but he was fairly calm. At that stage, I cautioned him. He sort of acknowledged that, and then he just went on. He told a story about how he turned on the heater, and the heater had started to make him want to cough. And he started to cough, And the next thing he realised, he'd crashed his car. The car rapidly sank. The kids didn't get out of the car, and he tried to get the kids out of the car by diving under the water. Now, at that stage, we really started to have our doubts about him because he just didn't look like a bloke who'd been diving under the water.
Back at the scene, any hopes of a rescue operation had long since faded. At 12:40 a.m, some 5 hours after the car had plunged into the dam, the vehicle was found by a police diver. In it lay the 3 bodies of Jay, Tyler and Bailey.
The vehicle was actually vertical, nose down into the mud. The driver's side door was open and the eldest boy, Jay, his upper body was out onto the driver's side door. So he'd nearly got completely out of the motor car, which was, upsetting for, I think, everybody there. So we winched the car out of the water. Of course, a huge amount of water ran out. The very first thing I saw was the ignition switch. Now, I thought it was very unusual that a person would, in the dark, have a coughing fit, drive out onto a dam and turn the ignition key off. And of course, the headlight switch was turned off. So why he turned the headlight switch off sort of astounded me also. So the gear shift wasn't in the overdrive position, it was in the direct drive position. And it was a cool, cold night and the fan wasn't turned on. So for a person that was having a coughing fit, had a cold, not to have the heater on, I thought was really strange too. So a lot of factors in the car that, and the 3 boys, of course, they were all out of their seatbelts, and that was very disturbing to think that they'd got so close and just didn't make it.
Whilst the evidence from the car and the scene was pointing to foul play, Farquharson's behaviour at the hospital was fueling detective suspicions.
At the completion of the interview, I had no doubt that something was terribly wrong. He only asked 2 questions, really. He said, I haven't been in a lot of trouble. I haven't been in a lot of trouble. What's the scenario for me from here? And the other one was, what's going to happen to me? I was gobsmacked because they're not the sort of questions you'd be asking. What are happening with the kids? They sort of cling on to hope and stuff like that, and they say, is there any chance that one of them might be all right? But he never did.
By now, Cindy had been taken to hospital in Winchelsea, suffering from severe shock. The grim task of identifying her children fell to Stephen.
Jay was in a body bag on the ground, and I had a little word to Jay. Said a prayer. I remember saying to the coroner after that, I walked back over to the coroner and I said, this is shit. I said, he said, yeah, this, in all the 30 odd years or something that I've been doing this job, I've never ever seen or been to anything as bad. I said, Tyler and Bailey are in the car, am I allowed to touch them? He said, no. Oh, okay. And with that, I walked over to the car. I knew Bailey was gone, obviously, but I whispered in his ear, you'll be safe.
I left the hospital and had a quick conversation with Jeff Exton. I said to him, something's dreadfully wrong here. And before I could more or less finish telling him what I thought was wrong with Mr. Farquharson, Jeff had said to me, he said, it's no good down here. He said, if he's saying that's what happened, that didn't happen. He said, there's something horribly wrong here.
Ordinarily, in a homicide investigation, police will have a crime and try to identify a suspect. In this case, they knew something had happened, they just didn't know if it was a crime.
The facts at the time were a vehicle had left the roadway, travelled across the embankment, through a fence and into the dam. The driver had got out, flagged down a car and gone back into town to raise the alarm, where he didn't partake in any of the rescue effort. And as detectives, that sort of raised some flags in their own mind as to, are we dealing with a tragic accident, or is there something more that needs to be further investigated?
I made a list, and on the top of the list I put he did it or he didn't do it. And on the left-hand side of the list I had a whole list of things that I wrote down which pointed towards him doing a deliberate act. And they were all along the lines of his demeanour, his dodgy story. Just the crash couldn't have happened the way he said it happened. The fact that the car was still under acceleration as it went into the dam. The fact that when I'd gotten into the car and he told me that he'd turned the heater on. Well, the heater was off. The lights weren't on, he'd turned the lights off and the ignition was off. The way that he wanted to be taken back to confront Cindy and tell her himself that the kids had been killed. And then I started in the he didn't do it. And I was really hard pressed, and the only thing I could come up with on the he didn't do it side was, who could be this evil?
Whilst the police carried on with their grim task, the family faced their own torment, the funeral of the 3 boys.
The children were buried in Winchelsea Cemetery. Cindy had booked a burial plot for herself to be buried next to her children one day. Unbeknown to Cindy, when they booked the burial plots, Robert had booked a burial plot for himself, next to the children and next to the wife that didn't want him anymore. It's the ultimate sick joke, I think, that he would be reunited with Cindy one way or the other.
The true nature of Robert Farquharson was perfectly captured by a photographer at the funeral.
There was the photograph of herself with Robert at the funeral, where they were clutching each other, they're propping each other up. With hindsight, that is sick too. Here she is being propped up by the man who's caused her all this pain.
The following week saw Robert Farquharson interviewed by police, and he stuck to his story about a coughing fit causing him to black out. However, the evidence that was being fed back to detectives from the dam was telling a different story.
There were at least 3 steering inputs to get that vehicle from the road to the dam. The first steering input is to turn off the roadway itself. They found no marks on the road to indicate a vehicle had lost control, no skid marks, scuff marks. The second steering input is to straighten the front tyres up again to follow a straight path. And then the third steering input is to miss the tree. It's veered to the right just before it went into the dam to avoid the tree that was there.
If there was 3 steering inputs into the motor car and it's been accelerated across there, clearly Mr Farquharson's not having a coughing fit, clearly Mr Farquharson's not unconscious, and clearly he deliberately drove the motor car into the dam.
As well as the forensic work being carried out, detectives were trying to determine if Farquharson's actions in the weeks and months leading up to Father's Day could reveal any clues as to what would happen that night.
Found a focus for his anger, I think, in the material possessions, and the focus was on what he referred to as the shit car, that Cindy had even taken the best car and left him with the shit family car. And it seemed to him, though, that the division of the family finances was completely unfair. He was a known whinger, a known moaner, who said all sorts of outrageous things. So there were a few veiled threats to Cindy. I think Cindy, having lived with Rob all those years and listened to all that sort of stuff, thought it was just more of the same. She was concerned he was depressed, but she never dreamed for a moment that he would was considering harming the children, and of course she was completely unaware of the conversation that he'd had with Gregory King outside the fish and chip shop 3 months before.
Greg parked his car and Farquharson pulled up next to him or near him in his own car, and they were just talking.
He'd got this festering anger towards Cindy over driving around in the good car, as he called it. As he was talking to his friend Greg outside the fish and chip shop, Cindy pulled up in the good car.
The essence of the conversation was that he was going to pay her back big time. Greg asked, what does he mean by that? He indicated that he would take away the most important things to her. And when Greg asked, what do you mean by that? Cindy was in the fish and chip shop with the kids, and Farquharson has nodded towards the fish and chip shop, indicating to Greg that he meant the kids.
And Greg was horrified and said, for God's sake, Robbie, you don't even think things like that, let alone say them. Nobody thinks things like that. That's your own flesh and blood.
But at the time, Greg just put it down to just Farquharson blowing off steam. And I guess knowing him as well as he did, probably thinking that that he would never ever do that sort of thing.
Greg King's statement was enough for police. On the 14th of December 2005, Robert Farquharson was charged with murdering his 3 children. Throughout the investigation, Cindy had been kept informed of progress. But despite the mounting evidence, she still couldn't comprehend that Robert could be responsible.
So on the day that we were going to charge him, I did go and see Cindy and let her know that that was the day he was going to be charged. And it was a very difficult time for Cindy. That was not what she was expecting.
I was devastated because I couldn't believe he did it. I was in denial.
They said, oh, we're charging him with triple murder. Okay, fair enough. Gerard said the same thing to Cindy. She just broke, absolutely hysterical, just broke. Yeah, she was beside herself as far as she was concerned. They were bastards and they were doing the wrong thing, charging him and this and that, and he loved his kids and blah, blah, blah.
She still clung on to that belief that this had to be a terrible accident. There was no way anyone would do such a dreadful thing just to punish her for ending the relationship. She could not get her head around that. So right from the time Robert was charged, she was part of the campaign to clear his name.
Police alleged he had deliberately driven his car into a dam and his sons had drowned. In August 2007, that theory would be tested in a highly publicised court case.
And that's what the purpose of a trial is to test the evidence to determine guilt or innocence. Cindy was supporting Farquharson in the first trial and didn't want to believe still at that point that he would deliberately do this to their children.
She was a gift to the defence. She was a gift in that trial because she said all the right things, but the evidence was overwhelming.
It was a 3-month investigation. There were things that we did to investigate the veracity of the story. We found a car that we put in the dam to test how long it was before it filled up with water. To me, that was very compelling that you had time where you could collect your thoughts, collect the boys, work out a plan and say, well, this is how we're going to get out. He could have saved at least one of the boys.
Inevitably, the whole trial was under the intense scrutiny of the Australian media, with the court of public opinion even questioning the veracity of the witnesses.
Members of the public couldn't believe that Farquharson could take his 3 children's lives in this fashion. And the negativity that we got on the internet from Facebook and those types of blogs that were set up was terrible. And affected me, got absolutely no doubt about that, affected my family. And it was a very, very stressful time.
I've never been involved in a trial where the atmosphere has been so toxic. No one was conceding anything. It was almost like the defence's view was that we'd been sitting at home and we'd been told about 3 kids killed in a dam, and we'd decided, well, I better stroll down to Geelong and see if we can find someone guilty of this. I just got the feeling that it just got personal.
On the 2nd of October 2007, 2 days before what would have been Jay's 13th birthday, the jury retired to consider their verdict. 4 days later, they found Robert Farquharson guilty of murdering his children.
I was praying that he was innocent, and when he was convicted, I broke down, like I was taken away in an ambulance.
Cindy and her mother both broke down. For myself, I had tears of joy running down my cheeks. I felt elated. I just thought, yes, you beauty.
Farquharson received a life sentence for each of the 3 counts of murder. The judge refused to set a minimum term for parole. Cindy, meanwhile, was left to continue her search for answers. Answers that certainly weren't forthcoming from Robert in jail.
He doesn't call her, he won't let her be on the visitors list, he won't respond to her letters. She hears that other people, other friends are visiting him, and yet he won't see her. And she started to think, I think she said to me once when I was there, you know, why do you think he won't respond to my letters? I said, why do you think? She said, well, it's not that I think he's guilty, but perhaps he just doesn't want to look at me. And why wouldn't he want to look at you? Why can't he face you? She said, well, I'd know if he were lying. I said, would you? Would you really know if he were lying? She said, I think I would. And maybe that's why he doesn't want to see me. And I thought then, somewhere in there, the thought is germinating, somewhere in there, that he just might not be telling the truth.
There was an initial time where she said, I feel as though he might have done it. She was in doubt for a long, long time until she put all those variables together and all those little bits of facts here and there together. And then she finally conclusively said, I believe he's done it. It was a weight lifted, but it was still a long road ahead.
On the 17th of December 2009, it was announced that Robert Farquharson had successfully appealed his conviction.
One of the things that came out of the publicity for the retrial was we actually identified a significant witness who came forward in relation to having been on the highway at the time the Farquharson's car was on the highway and saw pretty much the car go off the road.
Dawn Waite was a farmer's wife from Warrnambool who had been driving along the highway that night behind Robert. She didn't come forward in the first trial because she'd been diagnosed with cancer. She knew he'd been arrested. She felt that she was just another witness. They had a strong enough case. After seeing the coverage of the appeal where he was released pending a new trial, she felt that what she had to say was crucial. What she described was a man on a mission. He was slowing down and braking, as though he was pausing. She decided to overtake him because she felt he might cause an accident. But as she overtook him, she noticed he was transfixed, looking to the right. He wasn't even aware of her passing. He was just fixed, looking to the right. He wasn't coughing when she passed him. He wasn't in the midst of a coughing fit. She looked in a rear vision mirror and she saw the headlights of the car turning off the road to the right. Now, that was the car turning off the road and heading towards the dam. This was not a man slumped over the wheel or coughing in the midst of a coughing fit, as he claimed. It showed him slowing down over a distance, constantly slowing down, driving off, and looking to the right. A man that was looking for that dam. It changed everything.
Dawn Waite's statement to police was enough for Cindy. She was now convinced Robert was responsible for the deliberate murder of Jay, Tyler and Bailey. She contacted the police and changed her statement.
This is too incomprehensible. I can't believe that this person would hate me that much to want to murder his own children who he worshipped, the ground they walked on.
The second trial of Robert Farquharson began on the 5th of May 2010. And for the second time in 3 years, he pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of murdering his sons. Tellingly, Cindy chose to give evidence against her ex-husband.
She was dreading it, absolutely dreading this second trial. But when it came, she said, I was Robert's voice first time round. I spoke up for him. I was loyal to him, and I was misguided. But second time around, my children will have a voice, and I will be their voice.
As powerful and moving as Cindy's testimony was in court, a defining moment came when the accused took the stand.
Farquharson was put in the box and he had a shovel and he dug himself a hole and he never got out of it. I think his evidence was just unbelievably bad. He had clear memories of things that would suggest that he was innocent, and every time things were put to him about, well, how do you say this could happen? Oh, I don't know, I've forgotten. Can't remember. I can't remember was like his biggest answer, I think. He gave it almost like he'd lost his push bike. You know, we weren't talking about the 3 kids, and I think the jury probably saw what we saw at the hospital. And I don't think after you listen to Farquharson, you can come to too many other conclusions other than he killed his kids.
The day the jury delivered the verdict was significant because it would have been Tyler's birthday. And for Cindy, that was like a message.
We went and lit a candle at the church and prayed for the truth to come out.
On the 22nd of July 2010, on what would have been Tyler's 12th birthday, Robert Farquharson was found guilty again of murdering his sons. He received a life sentence with a minimum term of 33 years.
He's going to be 70-odd when he gets out. If he gets out. Why should he get out? They can't. They were put in a box. They can't get out. Ever. So why should he?
There's no closure for me. It's always there. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. There's always birthdays, there's always anniversaries.
What? Mummy do it?
Hate him with a passion. I don't wish death on him because I want him to suffer. I hate him more. I hate what he's done to me.
Turn around.
Bailey, turn around.
Wave to Mummy.
I hate him.
I believe this crime was so shocking because it was out and out revenge.
I think it all comes down to I don't think you realise the value of having a child. Consequently, there's 3 little boys gone.
When 2 people separate, don't use the children as pawns because you might be that person's ex, but you're not your children's ex.
Cindy said to me once, do you think he didn't love them? I said, I think he did love them. I think he hated you more.
Someone knew really where she was.
Trawling creeks, trawling parks, searching for any sign of her. A mother of 3 beautiful young girls does not just walk out on her kids.
The discovery of her body 10 days later revealed the secrets and lies that kept her hidden and unveiled the double life of her killer.
Impossible that she would have walked that far.
This was a very, very juicy story. Gerard had been having an affair. Everyone wanted to hear about the scandal.
Police emergency, what's your location?
Good morning, Brookfield.
And what's happening there?
My wife isn't home. No, I don't know where she is.
What's your name, first of all?
I'm sorry. Gerard.
And your last name, Gerard?
Baden Clay.
And what's your wife's name?
Alison with 2 L's.
In the early hours of Friday the 20th of April 2012, Gerard Baden Clay, a local real estate agent from Brookfield, reported his wife Alison missing. Police were quick to respond and word began to spread about the disappearance.
A friend from Brisbane phoned up and knew the real estate connection and said, you know, Alison Baden Clay's gone missing, and I was just been shot.
He was this beautiful Alison Baden Clay, this mum with 3 beautiful young girls, and they were a well-known family in the community.
People don't generally go missing in Brookfield, so it was a surprise.
It was treated like just any other missing person, perhaps, you know, a mum who'd gone off for a walk.
I don't want to be alarmist. I tried the 131 number, but just went on forever.
Yep. All right, Gerard. I'll get police to come and see you, okay? All right. Thanks, Gerard. Bye-bye.
45-year-old Gerard Baden Clay married Alison in 1997. The couple travelled the world before settling in Brookfield in 2000, where they had 3 daughters. The family were well known and loved, and when Alison disappeared, police immediately established a task force and rallied the community into action.
Obviously there was deep concern, and at that stage no one knew what had happened. Nobody in the general community, that is.
I got a call from the police asking to use our clubhouse as a command post.
The search was structured from Brookfield Oval, and I remember the emergency services out trawling creeks, trawling parks, trawling the neighbourhoods, searching for any sign of her. Search parties started forming. SES workers were looking in all areas, and volunteers were turning out, families in the area, neighbours. You could tell that it was a close-knit community who really cared for this woman.
I went down there to see the police, and that's when I met Alison's parents and extended family.
Brookfield Oval, in the centre of town, acted as a focal point for the police investigation and was located just 200 metres from the Baden Clay home. As the search progressed with local residents and volunteers involved, police held an appeal for information. It fell to Alison's parents, Jeff and Priscilla Dickey, determined to do whatever it took to find their daughter, to face the daunting task of speaking to the media.
Please, please help us to find our dear Alison. Our lives will never be the same. We must find her.
When Alison's parents did make the public appeal, it was incredibly emotional, incredibly upsetting. You could tell that they were so worried, they were so concerned about Alison's disappearance.
They were concerned for her well-being, very concerned, and she was much loved, well-loved person.
I think it became one of the most covered crime cases in Australia in about a decade. There was huge interest. It became not just a state story of relevance in Brisbane. Sydney was interested. For Sydney to be interested, that's big. So the network, it became a network story. And from there, we really had to be mindful of that and not missing anything, not missing any detail, not missing any scandal, not missing any reaction outside of the house, not missing a shot. We had to be really, really mindful, and that's when it became so life-consuming as well.
Whilst Alison's devoted parents worked with the media, and the police desperate for any clues that may help find their beloved daughter, the actions of Baden Clay himself started to raise questions.
Normally, someone's partner goes missing. They're there, they're distraught, they're upset, they can't sleep, they're just frantic.
Very strange, very strange. I thought he would have been down there from dawn to dusk like Jeff and Priscilla were.
Where the hell was he? Why wasn't he out in these search parties?
As Gerard Baden Clay retreated further from public scrutiny, the media became more insistent on finding him, and within days were tracking his every move.
It was 4 days after Alison went missing. We knew at that time it was very strange that Gerard hadn't been out actively looking for his wife and had moved in with his parents. My cameraman and I went straight to his parents' home and saw the door open. So we ran over to the driveway and Gerard did walk straight to us. And I thought, wow, we're very lucky he's going to say something here.
I'm trying to look after my children at the moment. They've got 3 young girls, and we really trust that the police are doing everything they can to find my wife. And
it was strange that he wasn't just standing there and saying, please, I beg you, give me some information about my missing wife. It was very unusual. I thought his eye contact was very strange. He didn't look at me, he kept kind of looking back and forth, looking to the ground, and his voice was quite high, it was quite strained.
We just hope that she'll come home soon. And I need to go now to an appointment.
From his sister's body language, she looks so nervous. There'll be people who'll be able to read your body language, read the intonation in your voice.
Being a crime reporter is very difficult. You've got to try and not become emotionally involved in a case, but that's very difficult. You're hearing a lot of horrific detail, a lot of detail that the public is really never going to hear. But I knew after doing that interview with Gerard Baden Clay on the driveway that day that this was a different case. In 12 years, I have probably covered around 30 murders, been exposed to a lot of terrible detail, had to talk to many victims of crime, and always trying to do that with respect. And in some ways you can become desensitised to a lot of information you're hearing. But I would really say this story became a career-defining moment for me, because never had there been such public interest in a case. We watched that tape over and over, and everyone commented on his eye contact or lack of. My cameraman said, something's not right with this guy. He was not genuine. It was not a concerned husband. It was not a desperate husband looking to find his wife. I felt he was covering something up. I did speak to one of my police contacts, and his first question when he heard that I had interviewed him was, did you see any scratches on his face?
On the right-hand side of Gerard's face were a number of distinct and possibly incriminating deep scratch marks.
At that point in time, I didn't know there were scratches. I wasn't looking for them. I went straight back to the tape. I had a look at it, and Gerard had been shielding that side of his face. When police did arrive at the house, he was very cool, he was quite calm, but they immediately noticed the scratches.
I should clarify, I cut myself shaving this morning, and everybody has said that looks suspicious.
It does.
And that's part of the reason I think that you're here.
It doesn't look like a shaving cut.
Gerard was very well known in the community. He was this apparent high-profile real estate agent. He was president of the Chamber of Commerce at some point. He made himself known wherever he went.
Probably the first I became aware of the family was the Baden Clay team was this trio, Gerard Baden Clay's father, his mother and Gerard himself, all wearing the gold jackets, the franchise they belonged to. I must admit, right from the start, I thought that it was a little bit on the back foot for an agent wanting to promote himself to have his mum and dad there. I felt I couldn't take them seriously.
He was just trying to be too cool.
A lot of self-importance, really not seriously in touch with his audience, not communicating on a real level. I know a lot of people were taken in by him. I felt he was phony and he was condescending, and there wasn't a real person there.
He was someone you couldn't sort of like warm to as such.
Word of mouth is extremely important, and it doesn't matter so much whether you wear the latest suit or what you drive. It's whether when they talk to you, whether they feel you're relating on a genuine level and that they can trust you.
A lot of people knew him. He was a bit of a man about town, I guess. And this is what really attracted the community, the audience, to this case.
Gerard Baden Clay's reputation as a respectable professional and husband continued to come under scrutiny when details surfaced that would fuel further speculation and doubt.
We'd found out that Gerard had been involved in a car crash.
Just after 3 p.m. on Sunday the 22nd of April, Gerard was involved in a minor car accident. Police revealed that Gerard had undergone medical tests for visible injuries on his body the day Alison went missing and was being recalled for further examinations when the crash occurred.
He was actually on his way to undergo more DNA testing to have more photographs of injuries sustained, the scratches on his face, the markings on his chest.
Gerard had told police that he suffered a reaction to a caterpillar bite, which left red abrasions on his chest and neck. Tests would later prove that no species of caterpillar that could cause such reactions were present in the area where the Baden Clays lived.
Perhaps the car crash that he was involved in, he was trying to disguise the injuries already there with fresh ones from the car crash.
I just thought there's more to this than meets the eye.
We understood why the whole thing was looking incredibly suspicious.
As the search for Alison continued, rumours began to circulate around the town, and the Baden Clay family appeared to close ranks.
Generally speaking, the media was treading with caution and concern, and I feel respect for Alison's family. It was a very different front in regard to the Baden Clays. They were always trying to hide from us, even escaping through neighbours' yards, jumping into different cars, borrowing friends' cars. It was just always quite strange that they weren't more cooperative with the media in the search for Alison.
I found it quite distasteful the way his parents were reacting to it, and that they didn't appear to have any real concern.
There was a team A in the community and a team B. There's a larger team supporting the Dickies.
As Alison's family maintained a vigil at Task Force Base, police asked Brookfield residents to search their properties, while over 400 emergency service volunteers on foot and horseback continued the search for Alison 10 days after she went missing.
The area was also quite residential, but there were some big properties as well. It was a very wealthy area, so police had encouraged landowners to search whenever they could as well to see if there was any trace of Alison, any clothing, anything which might help them with the investigation. So the community really became involved and part of this search as well. And that, I guess, really showed the concern for her. And also what I guess we could say was, I think, most people involved were expecting that a body would be found. You know, a mother of 3 beautiful young girls does not just walk out on her kids.
The Brisbane River is a good place for kayaking, and it's really nice to go kayaking early in the morning. Probably most people don't even know exists. It's very quiet in that part of the river.
Daryl Joyce, a professor of horticulture and resident of Brisbane's western suburbs, was enjoying the first morning of his holidays.
The first time I knew that a lady had gone missing was on the news. It kept going on for days and days. I became sort of most aware when they'd sort of set up a mannequin of the missing lady, dressed her up in the way that she was when she'd gone missing. And because it was local, and naturally we were all wanted to know what was happening, took a special interest in it.
Colo Creek is 14 kilometres from Brookfield. It's a small side creek that flows into the Brisbane River. Famed for its nature reserves and rich vegetation, the river and side creeks are often inaccessible on foot.
The Colo Creek itself, when you come off the Brisbane River, it's got a wide opening. I paddled upstream because that's the best way to go with the tides that day. And as I got closer to the bridge, I saw a body lying on the creek bank immediately underneath. And then as I got closer, there was a sort of smell. I still kept going past just to try and understand what was going on, and then I recognised the clothes, because that mannequin that they had in the park somewhere in Brookfield was dressed in a sort of 3/4 length pants, I think it was. And I figured out what it was, and I didn't stay around. There's no way you can get out of the kayak and do anything there anyway. You just end up falling in the water. So I just shot home and rang the police.
The woman's body, found yesterday on a creek bed, yet to be formally identified.
We're treating it very seriously that it may be her.
The grim discovery marked the tragic end of the 10-day search. The body was confirmed to be that of Alison Baden Clay. questions were now asked as to how had this much-loved mother of three ended up on the edge of a creek bed 14 kilometres from her family home.
Police are appealing to anyone that may have seen anything suspicious on the night that Miss Baden Clay went missing. In particular, they're asking for people that may have seen one of the two family cars, any evidence that there may have been some suspicious activity in this area.
Alison's body had been found and a sinister side had been put to the whole investigation. This officially became a murder investigation. It was so sad for her family. Incredibly sad. There were three little girls without a mother.
I felt it deeply because of my happy memories there with my family, and this is an horrific act.
When we did hear the news, it was incredibly sad. It was, and I know all of the police involved were very moved, saddened, upset for these three little girls who are now without a mother, upset for Alison's parents, her siblings, the community at large, her friends, because they'd all gathered around to try and find this woman who was, you know, a kind, loving, beautiful, professional, incredibly intelligent.
As Alison's family and friends came to terms with their tragic loss, police intensified their investigation and further information surfaced that would cast a shadow on what had appeared to be a flawless family.
After Alison's body was found, this idea of a perfect family in Brookfield was really shattered. Information started to come out, or was revealed to us, that Gerard had been having an affair. We found out who the woman was that he was having an affair with, Tony McHugh.
He said to me, "I need you to know that I love you and that I am going to be leaving my wife."
Tony McHugh began working for Gerard in 2008. Their affair began in August of that year. When Alison discovered her husband's infidelity in September 2011 and demanded the couple seek counselling, Gerard ended the affair briefly until the lovers rekindled their romance just 3 months later.
I remember the day when she was driven into Indooroopilly CIB into the police station and wearing glasses, and she was obviously not wanting any media exposure, but she was the unknown woman, the mistress, and pretty much straight away the feeling within the community as well was very negative towards her, obviously very negative towards Gerard.
His philandering, if you like, wasn't a total secret through the community and through the real estate industry.
Gerard Baden Clay had made promises to Tony McHugh regarding leaving his wife. The night before Alison went missing, she learned that both women would also be attending an industry conference the next day. McHugh was livid at the possibility of a confrontation with Alison, and in a heated phone call with Gerard, she demanded he tell his wife about the affair.
This was a very, very juicy story. Every little bit of detail about Gerard Baden Clay was just being lapped up out in the public. Everyone wanted to hear about the scandal. Everyone wanted to hear about what he'd done, what was the latest.
If you sat down and tried to get a well-off area, happy family, and then create this dark sort of background mystery, you couldn't have written a better story.
As police dug deeper, the private life of Gerard Baden Clay began to untangle spectacularly in public view as more startling revelations came to light.
We also began to find out that Gerard was in a lot of financial difficulty. He'd also bumped up Alison's life insurance policy.
Gerard Baden Clay immediately lodged a claim on his wife's life insurance the day her body was found.
It's a supreme arrogance and feeling that he could just pull the wool over everybody's eyes and they'd buy it. They'd just buy it.
All of these factors were really pointing towards something incredibly suspicious about this case. It was not a golden, perfect family. There were a lot of cracks in this marriage.
Affairs, financial difficulties, life insurance policies, and a major task force investigating his wife's murder. The deck was being stacked against Gerard Baden Clay, and every detail of his personal life was played out in public view.
All eyes were on Gerard Baden Clay, so that ramped up our coverage to a whole other level. It's pretty much 24/7 coverage of his parents' house.
I don't think I've ever known a tragedy of this kind to have so much publicity. Quite often you'll hear about it on the news, and you might hear it in the morning. You'd be lucky if you hear it in the evening, 1 or 2 days, and it's gone.
Everyone was talking about this case. It was a massive ratings period for TV news bulletins in Brisbane at that time.
With the salacious details of Gerard Baden Clay's life now publicly exposed, police carefully considered every detail of the case, and their investigation intensified to include personal possessions.
There continued to be a huge police presence at Gerard Baden Clay's parents' house. Several occasions in the coming days and weeks, detectives would go to the house. I remember one particular day they left carrying a lot of brown paper bags, so we knew that they were taking evidence to examine back at the police station.
The location of Alison's body also helped police with vital clues that would identify her movements before and after death. Dr. Gordon Guymer, a forensic botanist and director of the Queensland Herbarium, was instrumental in assisting police in the murder investigation.
I worked on the leaf material that was collected from the head and shoulders and hair of Alison Baden Clay. Then I could identify there was leaves from 6 different species. There's no other material, no other botanical material, which I would have expected. There would have been some grass seeds or some other material, but there wasn't, which I was a bit surprised. So then I rang the police and said that I'd now like to go to Colo Creek and then to the house.
Forensic experts revealed that Alison's body had lay undisturbed on the bank of Colo Creek for 10 days. Dr. Guymer had expected more local plant material to be present on her body, and the lack of this seemed unusual.
I did a full survey of that Colo Creek area where the body was found, recorded all the species, got my binoculars out and scanned up and down the creek, and basically could only see 2 of the 6 species that I'd found in her hair.
These missing species led Dr. Guymer to one inevitable conclusion. The other plant matter must have come from a different location, suggesting her body had been moved to the creek from elsewhere.
And then we moved to 593 Brookfield Road to the house, and all the 6 species were present. So then I went back to the detective and I said, I can see six species, all 6 species are there.
Dr. Guymer's botanical discoveries were proof that specific leaves from the Brookfield home were present in Alison's hair. This then begged the question, how did those leaves get there?
The only explanation I sort of heard put forward by the husband was that she'd gone for a walk early in the morning and then, something had gone wrong. I know that it's a long way from where she would have been walking at Brookfield, and impossible that she would have walked that far.
I decided that I needed to do far more investigation and more or less walked that 14 kilometres, recorded all the species along that route, and particularly the 6 species that were found in her hair. There was no part of that road which had all 6 species, so therefore it was impossible that the leaves in her hair could have got there by walking the 14 kilometres from her house to Colo Creek. The presence of species in the forensic evidence is critical in looking at crime reconstruction and possible scenarios of where Alison was at certain times. On the botanical evidence alone and a possible scenario, she was likely to be on the back patio area. That's consistent with the leaves, the age of the leaves, the species that occurred in her hair. So if the scenario is that she got to the car, she must have been carried to the car from the rear patio and then no doubt transported to Colo Creek. There's no doubt about that because there's no other species that link her to any other site, and the evidence would indicate possibly carried and then dumped into Colo Creek. When I was there, you got lots of seeds and grasses on your clothing, would indicate that she must have been carried and put into Colwell Creek.
More shocking revelations began to surface as police carried out forensic tests on Alison's car. Traces of her blood were discovered in the boot and on the door.
I remember a day that detectives arrived at the house. That day in particular, we knew something was going on. We all got particularly anxious. We thought, wow, I wonder if today's going to be the day that they'll arrest him. Everyone assumed that was going to happen, and we were just waiting. We were on 24-hour standby.
This whole scenario is like a classic Agatha Christie story.
Just 6 weeks after the discovery of Alison's body at Colwell Creek, police were focusing their investigations on one suspect. Gerard Baden Clay was taken to the police headquarters and interviewed.
Gerard had gone into the station with his lawyer. We all sprinted, jumped into the news cars to get over to Indooroopilly CIB. Everyone was set up, ready to go. And I remember it wasn't a long period of time before Gerard Baden Clay's lawyer did surface and said that his client had been charged, so he'd effectively been charged with the murder of his wife.
Denying any involvement, Gerard was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. The elaborate web of lies and deceit this apparently devoted husband and father had spun began to unravel dramatically in public view.
It was adrenaline overload. We were expecting it to happen, but I think everyone was almost in shock. I don't feel anyone was surprised, but there was a real relief, and finally this has happened. Finally this guy is going to have to face court. I'd become so engrossed and involved in this case for 2 months that it really was a bittersweet moment when he was arrested. When a young mother is killed, is found dead, and she's got 3 young girls, and you see how grief-stricken her family is, it just doesn't affect the immediate family as well. It's friends, it's the wider community. It was shocking.
My feelings were towards the daughters, towards her parents, the Dickies, and trying not to, express my anger towards him.
With the local real estate agent in custody, everybody braced themselves for what was sure to be an explosive trial. After 2 years of investigations, 1,500 lines of inquiry, and 500 witness statements, the trial began in June 2014, with police and prosecutors confident in their case against Gerard Baden Clay.
Yes, this is a very challenging case. I'm not there to join the dots, I'm there to provide the dots. And I was hopeful that the evidence I gave in court assisted the jury in making their decision.
Really interesting to see then how all of the pieces fell into place. Those little bits of information that were trickled to us, then that made sense. It was all fascinating to follow it and see how it all played out in the courts.
At the very start of the trial, Gerard Baden Clay pleaded not guilty, claiming he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance or death. During the court proceedings, extracts from Alison's diary were read aloud to the jury, revealing a wife and mother struggling with her marriage.
What really struck a chord with me was how troubled this marriage was, and information that came out from Alison's diaries. Outside, they looked like the perfect family. Successful real estate agent, beautiful, kind, friendly, loving, professional woman. They had 3 beautiful kids. Everyone loved the family. Definitely loved Alison and her children anyway. And what was so sad is that there was this woman who was battling on the inside and was not revealing any of that information to anyone.
Alison's diary revealed a heartbreaking existence within a troubled marriage. Insecurities arising from Gerard's continued infidelity, his refusal to be intimate, psychological and emotional abuse resulting in frustrations regarding body image and self-worth destabilised a strong and proud woman.
What went on behind closed doors, a lot of people didn't know about it, even though her friends did pick up certain behaviours and said they didn't like Gerard Baden Clay, but Alison continued to gloss over it all.
Following 2 years of investigations, a month-long trial and 5 days of deliberations, on the 15th of July 2014, jurors delivered their unanimous verdict.
Guilty. Gerard Baden Clay went from suburban real estate salesman to cold-blooded killer.
Gerard Baden Clay, a 46-year-old father of 3, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his wife, Alison, and ordered to serve a minimum term of 15 years.
Thank God, this bastard who's done this to this beautiful, caring, kind, lovely woman is going to be behind bars.
Yes, it was a very rewarding experience working with the Queensland Police, and I was very impressed with the way they operated, how professional they were, how precise, meticulous.
We never got to meet Alison, but dealing with the Dickey family and the extended family, after this lengthy investigation, I feel we know her.
It was relief for the family of Alison Baden Clay.
So those girls didn't lose just the mother, they lost the father as well.
I hope also for the daughters that whilst they've been robbed of the pleasure of their mother for the rest of their life, that I feel there's something of her spirit will always be with them. And I just feel that her love is with them.
For the family and friends of Alison, however, the relief was short-lived. In December 2015, after lodging an appeal, Gerard Baden Clay's conviction for murder was substituted for one of manslaughter.
There were gasps as 3 judges handed down their ruling, saying there was not enough evidence to prove he intended to kill Alison.
The news of the downgrading was met with widespread criticism, not least from Alison's friends and relatives.
Justice has not been served to Alison and her family.
The condemnation of the downgrading has helped shine a light on the growing and troubling issue of domestic violence, a problem that is affecting the whole of Australia.
Domestic violence happens everywhere, but she's really highlighted to the wider community that it's something we need to give focus to.
I think what it highlighted for me is that the media were focusing on what they didn't even know was a common problem.
Diane Mangan is the CEO of DV Connect Brisbane, a statewide telephone service offering help and support to anyone affected by domestic or family violence.
I've been working in the field of domestic violence and child abuse for 40 years. Many women are living with domestic violence. They are married to men who have standing in the community. These are sometimes women who have standing in the community themselves.
I think it brings to light that it can happen to any community, be it in a wealthy community like Brookfield or a lower socioeconomic community. There's no barriers.
Sometimes women need to know that it's not a shame factor, that they need to reach out to the family. And it's important for the family to let them know that.
If anything can be taken from this terrible situation, she's become a poster girl for domestic violence. And as a consequence, we see what's happening in Australian government at the moment. So much more funding is being allocated to domestic violence issues. It is very warming to see that perhaps other women can benefit from campaigning and funding and awareness which has been generated from this terrible, terrible story.
In a fitting tribute to Alison after her death, the Alison's Gift Foundation was established by family and friends. The organisation assists young victims of crime by providing financial assistance and support.
It's generally a family in pain that is driven to activism that leads the country into a change of attitude. This is where these changes come from. It's the death, the tragedies that propel families to want to keep it focused. And communities feel a great sense of compassion for something that's led by people who are suffering.
Whilst she's gone, the goodness from her life has just become magnanimous, and it's just, that part of it is brilliant. I hope it gathers momentum, and I hope that people really get behind it, and I know the Brookfield community will keep it going because she was so well loved.
Yellow is significant to the foundation, as it was Alison's favourite colour, and the lighting of Brisbane's Story Bridge on July the 31st, 2015 was in memory of Alison and other victims of domestic violence.
The lighting up of the bridge, the yellow, the flowers. She was so talented, she was intelligent, she'd had a really good career, and she gave it all up to become, you know, his wife and help him out with his business, and end up paying the ultimate price for it.
If anything positive can be taken from this tragedy, is that perhaps more awareness is being raised for other victims of family violence and the foundation that her friends and family have set up. And also we see what's happening within the Australian government is actually acting at the moment as well, and devoting more funding to domestic violence. And it's really, you can really hope that from this case perhaps other women who are suffering in similar situations will come forward, even tell a friend, even a family member, just talk to someone about it so that something so extreme and tragic never has to happen again.